afternoon.
That's a huge good.
Usually at these rallies, because it's a Flag Day rally and it's close to the anniversary of the Battle of Bunker Hill, we do a Revolutionary War theme. This year we decided we were going to change it up a little bit. This year happens, I think many of you may be aware, some of you may have forgotten, it is the 400th anniversary of the landing of the separatist Pilgrims in Plymouth.
Really?
And the Lord works in mysterious ways with this Wuhan flu. A lot of the events were canceled this year. Unfortunately, the people putting them on decided to use a less historical perspective, and that's gone. So many of our friends, many of our historians in the state and without, are putting events on. So if anybody is interested, you can contact me or my friend Dave, and we'll let you know what that's going to unfold. What I wanted to do, and I think this is going to be important, this is a Second Amendment rally. We had a great start to the rally. I think not only because it's the 400th anniversary, but those particular settlers defined who we were and what we were to become as Americans, what values and what mores that they held, including how to defend themselves. What I did want to do is I wanted to lead with a verse. I think it's appropriate when you talk about our Pilgrim fathers, our forefathers, very godly men. I want to read from James 3:16, and this applies very much today as you hear the words. For where envying and strife is there, is sedition, and all manner of evil works. For those of us that bother, if you want to turn on your television sets or your radios or your computer screens, you can see what's happening all around us. I think they have yet to hear from the rest of us who represent the country.
Amen.
Amen?
Amen.
So, what we're going to do is we're going to remind ourselves who we are and where we came from. What I'd like to do is start with what led these men and women and these families to come over. England had long since been a land of liberty, and it had been a tumultuous setting for many fights. A lot of the fights where you had tyrants and kings trying to disarm the populace. You had the Normans fighting the native Saxons, and contrary to public belief, the Saxons didn't completely lose out. And what had happened during that period of time, over the centuries, as things started to develop, one of the things that had happened was Englishmen were starting to discover the true faith and the true roots of their God and their relationship with Him. By the time we got to the end of the 16th century and beginning of the 17th century, you had a couple of groups in England that had separated out from the established Church of England. And they tried very much to exist in the society, but the authorities made it very difficult. So what they decided to do, a number of them, was to go to a new country that was fast winning its own war of freedom against the Spanish Empire and what we know as the Netherlands, Holland, Zeeland, Utrecht, and the rest. However, Holland was not freer than England was, but they could exist there for a period of time. They communed together. They worked with many men on the continent who were actually looking for the same things they were. They were the leading lights of the time that were spreading over continental Europe and beyond with a lot of these precepts that we hold dear today. At some point, however, it was getting tough with the authorities in Holland. The Prince of Orange, who was sort of the staff holder, the unofficial ruler, really, of the Republic, official in one sense, unofficial in the other, had been ordered by his kinsman in England, James I, to destroy the printing press that the separatists had set up in Leiden. They had removed from Amsterdam to Leiden at that point in time. Whole other story. And the long arm of King James Stuart had gotten too strong. So they decided that, well, we can't proselytize in Howell, we can't increase our church, and it was the age of discovery. So they had been approached with the possibility of settling the new lands that the English merchants and the English explorers had discovered. So they agreed to do this. No sooner did they agree to do it than the Dutch authorities approached them and said, hey, we're looking to do the same thing. And the answer was, well, no, we're Englishmen, we're not Dutchmen, and we're going to go and we're going to settle on our own. And they did this. To give you an idea of the Hannah province behind what these people did, they had helped charter a vessel. However, the merchants did not want these separatists to control the entire voyage, so they insisted on many of their own people coming along. That included maybe 40% of the 102 passengers that did come along. They hired men with them. They hired the ship's cooper, a man named John Alden. He was going to stay with the colony for a year. He ends up living there. The most important man they hired, a man that really isn't as well understood as he should be, was a man named Miles Standish. And the reason they hired him was he had been a former captain in the English army fighting in the Netherlands, became attached to the church in Leiden, stayed there, and worshipped with them. And they thought he would be the perfect man to help lead them. What was his job? Well, obviously living in Holland, part of the reason they had to leave too was the Spanish were about to break the truce that they had, so there was going to be fighting there soon. Had these people been captured by the Spanish king, they would have been much better off living with the English king, which is how bad it got. They taught them how to fight. He taught them how to use the firearms, the muskets. He taught them how to use the sabers. Why did he teach them this? Well, because where they were going, they better learn how to fight. It wasn't an alien concept to English people, though. They had militias forming back in those days in England. A little bit stronger later on, but the concept was an alien to them. And that's what they had learned to do. So when they landed in 1620, after a few false starts, they landed in Plymouth. The way they found Plymouth was after landing on the Cape. I mean, obviously Englishmen had landed in the colonies before. They'd settled in Jamestown, tried to settle later on in Popham, Maine, and what is now Popham, Maine. And then even before that, they were exploring Newfoundland, but that never took. Nobody ever really settled there. Two of the sailors that were on the Mayflower had been in that area before. It had been explored. And they said, well, there's a harbor and a village there that had been inhabited. It's no longer inhabited. The tribe has died. And our cartographers, John Smith, along with Prince Charles at the time, had named the place New Plymouth. They had just taken off of Old Plymouth after a false start. Now they're landing in New Plymouth. Very, very interesting. Then they decided they were going to stay there. And then they were going to form their government. However, a month earlier, they had discovered that they had been blown way offshore. They were supposed to land somewhere in the New York area, New York City area today, New York, New Jersey. And their patent was no good. So they had to draw up a set of laws to live by. So influential were these men and their walk with God and how they conducted their lives and their practicality, they drew up something we call today the Mayflower Compact when they were anchored off of Provincetown in Cape Cod, right? So, the amazing thing was the 40% that were not of their church agreed to do it as well. There was one reluctant one, but he was encouraged to sign and he did. But they came together as a body. After that first winter, there was a great sickness where half of them died, including half of the Mayflower crew. But they survived into the next year. The first thing they did, even before the sickness was over, they chose a captain for their militia. They chose Miles Standish to lead them. And these men had already been trained and they trained more. In fact, they were so good that when the emissaries from the Wampanoags, which is another fascinating story, came to see them, they saw how well trained they were. They saw them as potential allies against their own Indian enemies and the French and the Spanish and the Portuguese who were ravaging the coasts. That's what led to that first alliance with them. More importantly, these people saw that they had to be involved in their governance. They were given an opportunity, unlike many of their others at the time. Oh yes, Englishmen probably more than others had a say in what they were going to do. But these people were allowed to literally start what they thought was a new Jerusalem, and it turned out to be for them. Through many hardships. They governed themselves. They were very careful about who was going to have what position, how they were going to rotate it, how they were going to use it. Very jealous about how they were going to bring it through. They got their new patent. Turned out that they ended up being forced by the merchant adventurers who did not trust them. They said, look, we're losing money on this adventure. We're going to make sure that you bring something to us. And we don't have faith that you can handle this, so we're going to force you to work communally. We've all heard that story. Well, that was something foisted upon them. That wasn't anything they wanted to do. It was against their nature. Again, thinking about how they govern themselves, looking to the Bible as their guide. That's what they did. All of a sudden, after a few months of this, they sent one of their emissaries back to England. And they said, well, you're worried about the colony failing. Well, you just about insured it. We'll tell you what you need to do to help resurrect this. Well, at this point, the merchant adventurers, for the first time, were set on their heels. About to lose the colony, about to lose their entire investment. They said, fine, what do we agree to? And they set up an agreement where you had 7 men agree to be undertakers, absorb a lot of the debt. And they were able to pay that debt off much sooner and become a successful colony. They also, being separatists, were able to worship the way they wanted to worship. As I mentioned, 102 people came on that ship. There were about another 200 or so of their brethren left in Leiden. They were able to bring most all of those people to that colony through England to help settle and produce that commonwealth that became Plymouth Colony. And they understood, first of all, their role with God. Secondly, their role with each other and how they govern themselves. Everybody was a part of that governance. Nobody was left out of it. People who wanted to participate participated, and your level of participation determined your level of advancement. And they knew how to rely on this. They had to. They had to. As we sit back and we see what's happening in these days, we see the rewriting and revisionist history, which has been going on since before we were meeting here, right?
Indeed.
As we see the perversion of what's going on, there's a very bad aspect to it, but there's a positive aspect. The bad aspect is a lot of our fellow citizens, many of them may be in sympathy with us, they've forgotten where they came from and what it takes to bring this back.
That's right. Yeah.
The good part is, they're sparking something they don't want to spark. I will say this, every year since we've been meeting here, there's been a new spark, they've done something else.
Amen.
All right? I mean, one of the great sparks that they launched was a new presidency for a man that wasn't supposed to be elected. Oh, we knew he'd be elected, but they never wanted it. And that was only part of it. And there are more sparks being lit. We're at a precipice, folks, we know we are.
Yes.
But they're at an even bigger one, and they know it. We just have to make sure, again, who we are, where we came from, what it was we did. I would encourage you this year, and I will promise you, visit Plymouth. The 400th anniversary only comes around once. All right? I don't think I'm going to make it to the 500th. I don't know about you folks, but I would encourage you to do that.
Yeah.
I would do that very much, because you look at their example, it sets what we did. You know what happened in the 1690s, and there's a whole other story of in between. After we had fought another fight called the Glorious Revolution here in England, where we reestablished our rights, the colonies had their charters taken away. The old charter oak in Connecticut's a side story for that. Plymouth Colony was fused into Massachusetts Colony. So some historians say, well, that ended the colony. Well, it really didn't, because the Puritans that settled Massachusetts, which is another great story, decided to separate themselves. Yes, they had the civil government, but they adopted the church body out of Plymouth. And Plymouth still lives with us today. I think there are 30 million descendants of the Pilgrim Fathers that still live in the United States. And there are others around parts of the world. What I want to do is I did start with a verse of Scripture. I want to conclude with another verse and then the epitaph on Governor Bradford's tombstone, which I think is a lesson for all of us. I want to read from Hebrews 11, 13 to 16. Actually, probably more like verse 14. All these died in faith and received not the promises, but saw them far off and believed them and received them, thankfully, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. That was a verse that Bradford put into his On Plymouth Plantation. To me, in my opinion, the finest chronicle of American life and American story that exists, even before the concept itself was manifested. If you go into Plymouth today, which I would encourage you to do, you go to Coles Hill and the cemetery, which was the site of the first fort that they had built, but also it was the site of their burial, and it was also the site of the first church. You will see Governor Bradford, Governor William Bradford's tomb there, his obelisk. And it's written in Hebrew, Latin, and translated reads this way: do not so basely relinquish that which your fathers won through great hardship. And I will leave you folks with that thought. Thank you very much.